Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with the chess mysteries of Sherlock Holmes. It was Matt, a viewer, who put a comment in YouTube saying that he recommends the book, and I knew I had the book but I hadn't looked at it for a long time, so I studied the book again and want to share it with you. The Chess Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes is written by Raymond Smullyan, an American mathematician, concert pianist, logician, Taoist and philosopher, and I found out that he only very recently passed away in February 2017. The book is about retrograde analysis, which is a technique employed to determine which moves were played leading up to a given position. And a very nice quote from the book, which I will also explain later, is, "To know the past, one must first know the future." I picked out 4 examples from the book just to show you what retrograde analysis is about. And I remember the day that I was shown my first example of retrograde analysis, and it is quite an amazing little corner of our chess world. Let's have a look at the first one. In this position, which is actually on the front of the book, the diagram is printed on the front, and on page 17 it is explained. In this position, the task is, given that black moved last, what was his last move and what was white's last move? So you have to switch off your mind from normal chess. Of course, white is winning in this position because that h-pawn cannot be stopped. The only thing you have to be careful for is stalemate, but that is not important. What is important is what was black's last move and what was white's move just before that. I will quote from the book to give you the solution. "I thought for a while, then said, 'Holmes, I'm sorry to be such a slow pupil, but the situation again seems impossible. Obviously black just moved out of check from a7, but I don't see how white could possibly have moved his bishop to administer the check.'" Yes, indeed, it's hard to see how that could have happened. That bishop could not have come from another diagonal, so how did that bishop give check before the black king moved to a8? Again, I'm quoting from the book. "Not bad, Watson, not bad at all. I see you are beginning to think, but why do you have this persistent habit of forgetting that a move may involve a capture?" Then of course I saw it. "Right, Holmes, right. Black's last move was with the king from a7, capturing a white piece on a8. This piece must have moved before that, out of the diagonal from g1 to a7, to uncover check from the bishop. What piece could that be? Why, obviously a knight, which has moved from b6 to a8. Thus, black's last move was king a7 to a8, capturing a white knight. And that is indeed a solution. So black's last move was king a7 takes a knight on a8, and white's last move before that was knight b6 to a8, allowing the bishop on g1 to give check to the king on a7. So only these could have been the last moves from black and the last move from white. So the puzzle is solved. Let's look at the next one. Let's look at this position. Black has queen and pawn, and white has bishop and 2 pawns. But again, this is not a game position. Here the task is, suppose I told you that in the following position no pawn has ever reached the 8th rank. Would you believe me? Well, it's not very difficult. If you want to look for yourself, put the video on hold. I will give the solution now, and again I will quote from the book. So would you believe me that no pawn in this position has ever reached the 8th rank? If you did, you shouldn't have, because what I've told you is logically impossible. Here is the reason why. How did the white bishop ever get to g3 from its home square on c1, since the pawns on b2 and d2 have never moved to let it out? The only possibility is that the bishop, originally on c1, was captured on its home square without having moved, and that the bishop on g3 is really a promoted bishop. So that is the solution. That bishop on g3 could never have been the same bishop as the one that started on c1, because it could have never got to g3 with those pawns on b2 and d2. So it is a promoted piece, which means that a promotion took place in this game. Let's go to the next one. A lot more pieces on the board in this one. Both white and black have all their pawns and quite a few pieces. The problem here is, on what square was the white queen captured? Well, that looks very odd. Of course, white's queen is missing, but how on earth can we find out on what square it was captured? Well, we can. This is slightly more difficult. If you want to have a look, please put the video on hold. I will give the solution from the book now. I looked at the position and reasoned, well, Holmes, I see that white is missing his queen, both bishops and one knight. Now, two captures can be accounted for by the black pawns on e6 and h6. The first came from d7 and made a capture on e6. The second came from g7 and made a capture on h6. Neither white bishop ever got out onto the board to be captured by these pawns, since the one from c1 was hemmed in by the pawns on b2 and d2, which have not yet moved, and the one from f1, the bishop from f1, was hemmed in by the pawns on e2 and g2. Good, Watson, interrupted Holmes. I'm glad you were able to see that yourself. Elementary, my dear Holmes, I could not help but jest. However, I'm afraid my reason cannot carry me much further. All right, we now see that the white pieces captured on e6 and h6 are the queen and the knight. So the white queen was captured either on e6 or h6, but I cannot see why the queen could not have been captured on either one of them and the knight on the other. Well, said Holmes, then I have to give you some hints in the form of questions. One of the main things in solving these problems is to think of the right questions to ask oneself. Now, what was captured by the white pawn on b3? Obviously, a black bishop, I replied. What is the home square of that bishop? Clearly c8, as the bishop from f8 travels only on black squares. Right. Now comes the crucial question. Which was captured first, the black bishop or the white queen? I see no way to tell, I replied. Well then, put it this way. Did the white queen get captured before or after the capture on b3 by the white pawn? I looked at the position again and began to see the point. The white queen, I said, got out onto the board via the square a2. Hence the pawn on b3 made its capture first to let the queen out. And since the pawn captured the bishop, then the bishop was captured before the queen. Exactly, said Holmes. And now, does it not solve the problem? I do not see how. Well then, I guess the next question to ask yourself is this. Did the bishop from c8 get captured on b3 before or after the capture on e6? The pawn on e6 made its capture first, I replied, to let the bishop out. Correct, said Holmes. Now you have all the pieces of the puzzle. Watson, you have merely to put them together. Ah, I said, now I see it. The capture on e6 was made before the black bishop got out to be captured on b3, which in turn happened before the white queen got out to be captured. Therefore, the white queen was not the piece captured on e6. In other words, the sequence was this. First the knight was captured on e6, then the black bishop got out and was captured on b3. Then the white queen got out and must have been the piece captured on h6. So the queen was captured on h6. Very good, Watson, said Holmes encouragingly. I think with a bit more experience you will be able to do retrograde analysis. Well, I think this is quite amazing. When you look at the position first, looks like a very strange question. How on earth can we know where the white queen was captured? But after doing some analysis, we get to the conclusion that the white queen was indeed captured on the h6 square by the pawn on g7. Now the last one. A very simple position with only 5 pieces on the board. And let me quote you from the book. I came to one rather small room, a sort of library study. In the center was a possibly unfinished chess game. To my great surprise, Watson, a pawn was placed not on the border between 2 squares, but on a corner between 4 squares, c4, c5, d4 and d5. So there was one extra pawn on the board, but we don't know if that pawn is on c4, c5, d4 or d5. I said to myself, how careless can one be? Anyway, I thought I would see if I could deduce on which of the 4 squares the pawn lay, and then have a little fun by leaving a note for the players if they should return, telling them where the pawn should be. But I soon saw that as matters stood, the problem was unsolvable. So even Sherlock Holmes could not deduce where the extra white pawn should be on which of those 4 squares. He says, I couldn't know where the pawn should be unless I knew something about the future of the game. Whoa, this gets interesting. I went back to the room to clear up the still unsolved chess mystery. When I arrived, I found to my great disappointment that the game had been concluded. The players were now involved in the beginning stages of a new game. All traces obliterated. But then I had an idea. Gentlemen, I asked, would you mind telling me who won the last game? I did, replied one of them. This, Watson, solved the problem. The mystery is really exceedingly elementary, and I think you might enjoy trying your own hand at it. So in this position we have to add a pawn on either c4, c5, d4 or d5. And the only other piece of information we have is that this game did not end in a draw. So again, if you want to look, put the video on hold and see if you can find out where that pawn should be. I'll give the solution now from the book. The game did not end in a draw. More specifically, the game did not end in a stalemate. Now Watson, if it was white's move, then regardless of where the white pawn stood, white would have no possible move to avoid stalemate. That black king is completely surrounded. Squares it cannot go to. So if it's white's move, then it's a stalemate, which means the game ended in a draw. Hence it has to be black's move. But what could black's move be? The only possibility is that the ambiguously placed pawn really stands on c4 and the black pawn takes it en passant. Therefore, the white pawn stands on c4. That is the solution to the problem. If the pawn was on any other square, then black would have had no move. It is black's move, but he would have had no move, which means the game is a draw because of stalemate. But with the pawn on c4, there is a move for black. Taking en passant, b4 takes c3. Quite a nice problem. And here the quote was given, "To know the past, one must first know the future." Quite a nice quote. So a very interesting book, The Chess Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes. And I wanted to give you a flavor of it. This video I know is very different from the videos I do normally, but I wanted to give you a flavor of retrograde analysis, and I hope you liked it. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and I'm looking forward to your comments on this topic. You also may want to check out my Chess to Progress channel. The link is in the description box. This is Rick from Chess to Impress. Thank you very much for watching.